28th of September, 2016. South Australia. One storm. Winds hit 260 kilometers per hour. 22 transmission towers collapsed. 1.7 million people went dark. Not a cyber attack. Not a war. Wind and rain. Restoration took up to 2 weeks in regional areas. That event proved what grid engineers already knew. Some cities sit on infrastructure so fragile that a single failure point switches off everything. No redundancy, no backup corridor, no cavalry. AEMO's own reliability assessments flag these gaps every year. Nobody reads them. We did. 7 cities, ranked by how fast the lights die and how long they stay dead. By the end, you'll know which ones collapse in hours, which hold for days, and which were never designed to survive alone. Most people won't watch past City 3. That's the difference between you and most people. Number 7. Adelaide. You already know part of this story because you lived through the headlines. But here's what the headlines left out. South Australia's entire grid connects to Victoria through a handful of interconnectors. The Hayward interconnector carries roughly 650 megawatts. That's it. That's your lifeline to the national electricity market. On that September night, the storm didn't hit the power stations. It hit the transmission towers north of Adelaide. 22 of them. Steel lattice structures folded like aluminium cans. When those towers fell, the interconnector tripped. Generation inside the state couldn't compensate fast enough, and the entire network cascaded into black system conditions within 90 seconds. 90 seconds from functioning state to total darkness. Most people picture a blackout lasting 4 hours, maybe 8. Regional South Australia waited 14 days. 1 corridor, 1 storm, 1 state gone dark, 1 point of failure. Number 6. Darwin. You can't lose connection to a grid you were never connected to. Darwin sits 2,700 kilometers from the nearest capital city by road. There's no interconnector, no backup transmission line snaking down from Queensland. Darwin generates its own power, almost entirely from gas, fed by a single pipeline corridor. Total generation capacity sits around 550 megawatts. Now add Category 5 cyclone exposure. Darwin averages a direct cyclone impact roughly every 3 decades, but severe systems brush the region far more often. When that pipeline drops pressure or a cyclone shreds local distribution infrastructure, there's no one to call. No neighbouring state sends electrons north. You're generating your own power, or you're sitting in the dark. Darwin doesn't lose connection to the grid. Darwin was never connected. 1 point of failure. Number 5. Hobart. This is where it shifts. You picture Tasmania as green. Hydro dams, clean rivers, renewable paradise, and it is until one cable snaps. Basslink. A single undersea cable stretching 370 kilometers across Bass Strait, carrying 500 megawatts between Victoria and Tasmania. In December 2015, that cable failed. It stayed failed for 6 months. Tasmania had been running its hydro dams hard during drought conditions. Storage levels dropped below 13%. An island state that built its identity on hydropower found itself shipping in diesel generators on barges. Emergency generation costs ran into the hundreds of millions of dollars. The crisis exposed a truth nobody wanted to hear. Tasmania's energy abundance depends entirely on rainfall and one single undersea cable. When both fail simultaneously, you're rationing power on an island with no other way in. An island that forgot it was an island. 1 point of failure. Number 4. Townsville. The infrastructure corridor between Townsville and its power sources stretches hundreds of kilometers south through some of the most flood-prone terrain in Queensland. In 2019, a monsoonal event dumped over 1,100 millimeters of rain in less than 2 weeks. Suburbs went underwater. The Bruce Highway cut. Supply lines to generation assets became physically unreachable. Townsville's coal and gas plants sit at the end of long, exposed transmission corridors that cross rivers, floodplains, and cyclone strike geography. The plants themselves are aging. Some have been operating for decades beyond original design life. When the water rises, you can't reach the power station to fix it, and you can't reroute power from somewhere else because the corridor is the only path. The road to the power station is underwater. So is the power station. One point of failure. But at least every city so far generates its own electricity. At least they have power stations, pipelines, dams. Wait until you see a capital city that has nothing. Number 3. Canberra, the national capital, seat of parliament, home of defence, and it generates virtually zero of its own electricity. Read that again. The city that runs the country can't run itself. The ACT imports roughly 100% of its electricity from New South Wales through interconnectors. Local generation capacity sits effectively at 0 megawatts. Daily consumption runs at roughly 550 megawatts during peak periods. That's a deficit of 100% the moment those interconnectors fail. Now think about what surrounds Canberra. Bush. In January 2020, bushfires burned through the transmission corridors feeding the ACT. Fires and smoke simultaneously threatened the roads, the power lines, and the people. The question nobody asked publicly was the one grid engineers were already modelling. What happens when New South Wales itself is under stress? So during a heatwave, when Sydney's demand surges past 30,000 megawatts and AEMO starts activating the reliability and emergency reserve trader mechanism, New South Wales has to make a choice. Keep Sydney lit or keep feeding Canberra. That's not a technical question, that's a political one. And political questions have political answers. Here's the number that matters. Canberra's local generation capacity, 0 megawatts. Canberra's peak consumption, roughly 550 megawatts. Deficit if interconnectors fail, 100%. Every other city on this list has something. A gas plant, a dam, a diesel generator bolted to a barge. Canberra has a phone line to New South Wales and a polite request. The seat of power has no power of its own. 1 point of failure. Number 2, Cairns. If you live in Cairns, you already know. You don't panic when the lights go out, because the lights go out regularly. Cairns sits at the end of a long transmission corridor stretching north from central Queensland generation hubs, hundreds of kilometres through cyclone first strike geography. Local generation is limited. When a Category 3 or stronger system makes landfall, distribution infrastructure takes days to restore, sometimes longer. Average restoration after a severe cyclone event runs 5 to 10 days in surrounding regional areas. Cairns doesn't make this list because of a single dramatic failure event. Cairns makes this list because the failure is routine, normalized, built into the calendar like wet season itself. The population has adapted, which tells you everything about the infrastructure. Cairns doesn't panic when the lights go out. That should tell you something. 1 point of failure. Number 1, you're expecting Melbourne. Everyone expects Melbourne. It's not Melbourne, it's Geelong. In March 2017, the Hazelwood Power Station in the Latrobe Valley closed permanently. 1,600 megawatts of baseload generation vanished from Victoria's grid overnight. AEMO has repeatedly flagged load shedding risk during peak summer demand ever since. When temperatures push past 40 degrees Celsius and every air conditioner in Victoria runs simultaneously, the grid enters managed deficit. Load shedding becomes necessary. And here's the part nobody in Geelong wants to hear. In a managed blackout, Melbourne's hospitals, emergency services, and critical infrastructure receive priority. The shedding protocol pushes outward from the centre. Geelong, sitting on the grid's periphery, gets shed first. You're not experiencing a failure, you're experiencing a decision. Melbourne's grid operators have already decided, in advance, that when the numbers don't work, Geelong goes dark, so Melbourne doesn't have to. AMO's reliability, and emergency reserve trader has been activated multiple times in recent summers. Each activation is an admission that the margin has disappeared. Geelong sits on the wrong side of that margin every single time. Remember when Adelaide losing one corridor seemed bad? Geelong doesn't lose a corridor. Geelong gets sacrificed by design. Melbourne doesn't go dark. Melbourne sacrifices Geelong so it doesn't have to. 1 point of failure. 7 cities. 7 single points of failure. Adelaide's corridor. Darwin's isolation. Hobart's cable. Townsville's floodplain. Canberra's total dependency. Cairns' normalised outages. Geelong's expendability. The grid isn't a web. It's a series of single threads, and every thread has a breaking point that's already been documented, already been flagged, and already been ignored. You now know something most people in these cities don't. You know the specific mechanism that switches off their lights, how long restoration actually takes, and where the decision makers have already decided to let the darkness fall first. That's not pessimism. That's architecture. The question isn't whether these failure points activate again. They will. The question is whether you've planned for the actual duration or the assumed one. 4 hours is an inconvenience. 14 days is a crisis. What the difference between those two numbers is the difference between someone who watched this and someone who didn't. Which city do you live in, and did it make the list? Drop your city below. The lights are just the beginning. Next time, we're looking at the inland towns that lose water pressure the moment the grid fails, because when the pumps stop, the taps go dry. And that clock runs faster than you think.